In ancient Greek society, there was a place in the center of the community called the agon, A-G-O-N. And this was a place for contests, where they had wrestling matches and other athletic events, because all the men were constantly trying to show who was the better. And from this word, the agonia, which means the contest itself, held in the agon, we get our word agony. The struggle and striving to be superior. And a lot of people that you meet you'll recognize this among your friends all the time, are not happy unless they are involved in the contest. It doesn't matter what it is, so long as they're trying to beat something, they're happy. And you may say, oh, for heaven's sake, can't we just sit around and talk instead of having to play a game or bet or do something to prove who's the stronger? I was once married to a girl who was never happy unless she was engaged in some kind of contest. Well, of course, I had a game that didn't look like one. And so it was a very superior game, just because it didn't look like one. But it was a form of the game, my game's better than yours. So, you can't really not play. You may go through the motions of not playing, but you still are. And one of the most marvelous examples of this is the Buddhist Sangha. The Sangha means the order of Buddhist monks, or monks isn't quite the right word, because the basis of Buddhist monkhood is a little different from Christian, but I don't want to go into that technicality. Here are these people living in, say, Burma, Ceylon, Thailand, and so on, who go around in yellow robes and have renounced the world. But of course, they've become, as a community, very prosperous and powerful. And everybody, makes obeisance to monks and feeds them. And they don't feed just on rice gruel. Important monks get called into the houses of wealthy laity and get given fine dinners, because the layman feels he's acquiring merit by being so generous to the monks. And you should see the scene in Japan. Although today the monks have lost their power to a large extent, you can see the traces of the power they once had. In the city of Kyoto, the Buddhist orders, Zen, Tendai, and especially Shinshu sect, have the best parts of town. If you stay a night in a Zen monastery as a guest, and go into one of the rooms there, you're not in any hovel, you're in a palace. You live differently from the way we are accustomed to, but you're liable to get shown into a room where the walls are entirely covered in gold leaf and painted by the greatest masters of Japan. You'll say sit down to sleep by a Kano Motonobu screen. And the landscape around you, the gardens, the view, are gorgeous beyond belief. This is the life of resignation. Now, it's true. I know most about Zen monks rather than the other orders. Zen monks live a pretty rough life. But it's extremely tony. It's healthy. It's absolutely non-masochistic. They have studied the art of enjoying poverty. Now, this is a terribly important thing in the understanding of Far Eastern culture. When a man in Japan, if he sort of inherits an old-fashioned tradition, makes a killing in business, he doesn't go around showing off how much he possesses. He goes around showing off how little he possesses. Even though he may drive to his office in a Mercedes or a Rolls Royce, his house is relatively barren. And he chooses objects of art and paintings that look extremely simple. And he will, as likely as not, have a separate house from his main huge establishment, where it's like a hermitage. I mean, it's almost as absurd in its own way as Marie Antoinette playing shepherdess after reading Rousseau and having a little cottage, rustic cottage in the grounds of Versailles. But it's not quite as absurd as that, because even the main house has an austerity about it. And they learn, you see, to love that austerity. To them, It has the feeling of great comfort. Now, you see, what happened was this, that long ago, the best part of Kyoto, the hills that ring the north side and east of the city, being so beautiful, were owned by a bunch of brigands, who were later the noble daimyo, or lords of Japan, the great feudal barons. And these people were as tough as all get out. They were always fighting. And so the Buddhist monks moved in and decided they would take this property away from the daimyos by out-competing them. By playing the game, our game is more interesting than your game. So they said to all those brigands, so what? You've attained all these conquests, you have your castles, you have your great estates, but then what? It all falls apart, you know, especially when the brigand is getting a little elderly and has stomach troubles and dizziness and so on. And this monk comes along and says, and furthermore, the monk says, you can't scare me. And the brigand says, "Arr!" And he pulls out his sword and he says, this monk. But now the point is he can't kill the monk then and there, because if he does that, he won't find out whether the monk was scared or not. And so the monk looks him straight in the eye. And nothing happens. He doesn't flinch. And the brigand has now in a contest, he thinks. And he puts the sword point right against his throat. Well, the monk has it right there. But you see how, in a way, easy the game was. Because the monk knows that he wins his point. If he doesn't give, if the brigand kills him before the monk flinches, he's obviously cheated. Now, since there is honor among thieves, the chances are, although there will sometimes be a brigand who will feel put down by this contest and therefore kill the monk, the chances are that he won't. But look what the monk stands to gain. If he wins, the brigand says, wow, would I like to have that courage? Because if I had that courage, I would be that much better a warrior. So the monk says, I'll teach you. And as a result of that, the monk does teach him. He teaches him the practice of Zen, Zazen, meditations, and all this kind of thing, and puts him through the works. And so he comes to understand what the monk did understand anyway, which was that it really doesn't matter if you live or die, because the thing goes on. It's perfectly indestructible. If you happen to die, it just goes on in a new way, because you are the works. So, fine, but the monk is playing a game. And so, as a result, all these Zen communities got given the old palaces. The brigands all moved to Tokyo and set up their business, and all around the great court, and the gorgeous temples and grounds went to the monks, where, although none of them owns anything personally, which is a great idea, you know, because you don't have any responsibility then. The community owns it. And you don't have to pay any taxes. And since you're a non-profit organization, you're not taxable anyway. Oh, it's a great setup. And they really did it beautifully. But what they did, in effect, was to con those brigands out of the best land in Kyoto. By resignation. By playing a higher game. But you see, anyone who goes through that, goes through the Buddhist process of resignation, will come to a point where he knows that he didn't resign at all. And this is what makes the difference between pedestrian Buddhist monks who think they've resigned and feel a little bit guilty because it's such a prosperous affair to resign, because you live in the best places and so on. And those ones who know, who go right through, who constitute a small residue of great Buddhist masters, who discover that they can't resign at all. Let's consider an extreme example of resignation. The life of a hermit. Far Eastern literature is full of the idealization of the hermit's life. The wonderful idea of an old man somewhere in the mountains, far off in the forest. Hakuin's books describe such an individual, who can't be found. Nobody knows where he is. He leaves no trace, and they consider that as admirable. The poem, you know, which says, I asked the boy beneath the pines. He said, the master's gone alone. Herb gathering on the mount, cloud hidden, whereabouts unknown. And that idea of the far-off man, way, way, way off in some forests. But what does a hermit discover? If you try this, and get as lonely as you can get, you become vividly aware that you can't get away from it. Because when you get very lonely and very quiet, you become extremely sensitive. And everything that goes on that's ordinarily unnoticed comes to your attention. First of all, you will find there's a community of insects. And they're tremendously interested in you, and not necessarily hostile. They may be sometimes. But alone in the forest, when you get really quiet, you'll notice little creatures will come and inspect you, look you all over. And they'll go away and tell their friends, and they'll come and look and see what it is. And you become aware of every single sound. And you realize that alone you're in the midst of a vast, murmuring crowd. It may not be human, but it's everything else. So that the point of being a hermit, the discipline, leads you to understand that you can't resign. The lonelier you are, the more you're joined together with everything else, because you get more sensitive. So then I find, I cannot give up playing the game. Look at it too from another point of view. Supposing I say, everybody's playing the game, me first. Now I'm going to play the game you first. To use the phrase of Bonhoeffer, who called Jesus the man for others. Now let's see if we can play that game. Instead of me first, you first. After you, please. Will you please? What a way this is of putting everybody down. See, I'm the one, who's so generous. I'm the one who's so loving, so self-effacing. And all you inferior brats can go first. You can play me first. I'll play you first. I'll try and convince you to play you first. But the success of convincing you on that is relatively small, and therefore the in-group will always be the people playing you first. And therefore they will get the honors. So when you think that through, and you say, I cannot stop playing me first, there's no way of not doing it. I say, well, now what does it mean when I'm in a trap that I can't get out of? There's no way of getting out of this trap. Well, what it means is that you and the trap are the same thing. You're not caught. Because when there's nobody in the trap, there's no trap. See that? As long as you think you're in a trap, then the trap's got you. But when you know you are the trap, then what has the trap got? If you're trying to get out of the game, you're trapped. There's no way out. But when you have found that you and the game are the same, there's no game to get out of. There's no one to get out of the game. And that's true resignation. And then you can take the point of view of the bodhisattva as distinct from the arhat. The arhat in Buddhist terminology is the person who escapes from the wheel of birth and death, the samsara, and gets out of the game. So he stands here. The bodhisattva is the arhat plus. He's the arhat who's gone on to find out that you can't get out of the game at all. So the bodhisattva is found over here. In other words, he goes back into the cycle of reincarnation and doesn't bother about escaping anymore. So, in just the same way as repentance leads to the understanding that you're a phony, even in repenting, resignation leads to the understanding that even in resigning, you can't resign. It isn't as if someone were saying, you must play this game, and you felt yourself under some sort of compulsion. It's rather discovering that the game is what there is. And if you got out of it, would be to be nowhere. You don't have to play. This is the point. I'm going to repeat this because this is crucial. It isn't that you have to play, because that would make you feel a victim of some process beyond yourself that was compelling you. It is that the playing is you. And nobody is shoving you around. Because you and the universe, which seems to constrain you, are not two things. If you play the game that you are only here, then you'll feel pushed around. But when, through trying to resign from either pushing around or being pushed around, you discover that it can't be done, you then become very much aware. There is no point getting away from anything. Where is the way? And so it said, a true Zen monk has a mountain hermitage in any place that he stands on. So let's have intermission.
Subscribe and hit the bell notification to hear the next part when it is uploaded.